Well, I would say um, our our intentions were good, and I'll tell you the basis was that Somalia kind of factioned into a whole bunch of warlords, and most of Somalia and Somali people live out in really in the desert land, and they're just farmers. They're just trying to survive. They're fine with that. They do have big cities in Somalia where
Right.
people live. So what the warlords were really doing is fighting. There was not a stable national government for Somalia. So these warlords were fighting and basically stealing resources. And by that, I mean food and water. And
Mm.
they were starving people to death unless they would come essentially work for them. Um, I went there, I pretty nervous about that kind of flying and stuff, and just wondering what would ever happen if something happened. We got stuck in Somalia or in Mogadishu, which is the capital of Somalia. Uh, so a lot of the warlords were hiding out. I was nervous about it, but I didn't know how bad it was with respect to how strong the warlords' little fighters were, teams of fighters. But they were, and they were effective, and they figured out what they could do to start making an impact on our forces, which is essentially what happened in Black Hawk Down. Very unfortunate, very scary. I remember seeing the videos of the pilots of the Blackhawks drugged through the streets, their dead bodies at least, and that's pretty impacting to the American people because uh, ultimately we were the U.S. sent military forces in there essentially on a humanitarian mission, but with a lot of offensive capabilities and force that we were really using to try and get rid of these warlords. Um, and and it was unfortunate. It was a little scary. I went in November 2001, but didn't go to Afghanistan. We actually went to Pakistan,
Mm.
and
Okay.
we were based out of Pakistan at the time. And in 2001, when we first went, would fly most days into uh, into Afghanistan in multiple different locations. What we mostly did was every night we would only fly at night for our defense. We would just fly stuff up, um, either equipment, cargo, ammunition, water, food, anything, into various locations in Afghanistan. And then a very little bit of our time we would spend actually doing air refueling missions with helicopters, either Marines or special ops helicopters, as they needed fuel to get up into the mountains. Uh, we could position ourselves up even further north if they had to go really north into the mountains, and they could fly up there, and then we could give them gas once they were there and fill them up, and then it just gave them more ability to do things. The airfields that the U.S. ended up using in Afghanistan the whole time, um, two of those were Kandahar and Bagram air bases. Bagram is actually on the outskirts of Kabul, which is the capital. Kandahar is pretty far south. But the fuel lines that supplied jet fuel to those airfields was cut and destroyed by the Taliban. So there was no fuel there. So one of the things that we would do is fill our plane up with gas and fly it up, and we would download our fuel from the plane into these big giant bladders. They look like giant flat M&Ms, so that the helicopters flying around up there had a way to get gas. It's probably one of the most important things we did because we could supply a lot of gas every night. The truth is, the workhorse of the military, especially for forces that are on the ground, and especially if they're shooting and they're infantry. Um, I mean, the key elements in the workhorse are the enlisted forces, and they're the ones that are trained to go do it. The officers go do it also, just have a different level of responsibility and decision making, and a responsibility to, before ever going into combat, earn the trust of the enlisted Marines. And so it becomes it really is all about leadership, and you can't fake people into trusting you. You actually have to do things, and your actions will. Yeah, and words don't make people trust you either. It actually has to be actions that you're doing throughout training that make the enlisted or give them a level of trust in you. So that's kind of the difference. The enlisted personnel on the ground are actually the workhorse doing all the hard, dirty, scary jobs. Really, the
Yeah.
officers are doing that too, but there's a lot fewer of them, and a lot of times they're not trained for exactly what they're doing, but they have to make the decisions to send enlisted Marines and other services to go do those things that are not necessarily that fun. There's been in U.S. history a couple of battle cries that were used. One of those was "Remember the Alamo," and the other one was "Remember Pearl Harbor." And very quickly in the U.S. lexicon and in the military, we used "Remember 9/11," and and the reason that you say 9/11 is that it was not one geographic location. So we use the fact that we just got kicked in the face. In other words, we being the United States, not the military, not the media, not sports, nothing. It was the entire United States got kicked in the face. So it was easy to keep that motivation going. But I will say, like, it's hard. It's hard for us, um, and I think we've proven that over the last 25 years. Uh, it's hard for the U.S. in our culture to understand um, the unique nuances that other cultures have, and some of it has to do with religion. Some of it has to do with just how their life is. I don't think we can ever do enough. So yeah, there's always more that can be done because we don't, and there is training on it, and things that you have to learn some certain things to know what not to do to offend people, because we don't want to offend people that are like want us there, but it's kind of like the term "the ugly American." That's where it comes from, because as Americans, we can tend to be very arrogant
Mm.
in our beliefs. But when we go to someone else's country, we really have to focus on, okay, well, what's important to them? And how do we not offend them so we can keep communicating? And because ultimately that may lead to diplomacy. Um, and to have diplomacy, you have to have respect on both sides. And the respect comes when we do try and learn about other cultures, especially when we're in their country.